Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com. And from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 285, Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Hello and welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, are you ready to be hounded?
I'm ready to be dogged. I'm ready to be hounded. I'm ready to be fished. I mean, just about any member of any animal kingdom is welcome to have a nibble at me today.
That is, you must be barking mad.
No, I'm backing up the wrong tree.
Well, we have a great interview ahead in this episode. We're going to be joined by Elizabeth Crowens, author of the new novel Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles, which takes us back to the late 1930s, early 40s era of Hollywood, kind of that Nick and Nora Charles, Basil Rathbone era. And as a matter of fact, those names will come up in this particular story, so you'll want to stay tuned for that interview. We also have our weekly, or not weekly, I guess it's our fortnightly. Well, I don't even know if it's fortnightly, because we do these shows, on the 15th and 30th of every month. That's just a day longer than a fortnight, or a couple days longer in the case of going from the end of the month to the 15th. So it's our bi-monthly, our twice-monthly Canonical Couplet quiz. There we go. We've solved it. This is where we give you two short lines of poetry, and we ask you to decipher which one of the 60 Sherlock Holmes stories it is representing. And then all of the people who correctly guess the answer, their names go into a big revolving drum, and we choose them at random. And the winner gets a prize. And in this case, it's going to be a copy of Elizabeth Crowens' book. And we'll also have the winner from the last episode announced. So you'll want to stay tuned for that right after we speak with Elizabeth. But first, we've got a little bit of business and then a little bit of news to take care of. So on the business side, just a reminder that you can find all of our archives at ihearofsherlock.com. There's an archives tab there to listen to the show. We go back, this is our 18th season now. So we go back almost 300 episodes. You can choose which works for you there. And we also have the ability for you to sign up for Patreon and to support us on Patreon. And at certain levels, we send out thank you gifts for our Patreon supporters. Got some news about the Patreon experience in the news section coming up, so you want to stay tuned for that. But we always love hearing from you, too. So if you don't feel like supporting us, that's okay. You can listen to us for free. And you can comment on every episode right there on the website, or just send us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We'd be delighted to hear from you. And please tell someone else about the show. Okay, news. I guess, this news, traffic, and weather on the threes, or are we just doing a news thing? Here's the deal. We first, before we actually get into the news, we did have some comments. I wanted to get to one from Max McGee. He was talking about our BrettCon episode with Gus and Luke. What a great conversation we had with them about all things Granada and Jeremy Brett. We had a wonderful bonus episode there, about 15 minutes of extra conversation that delved into, among other things, the photography of Sir Brian May, which was a lot of fun. But Max wrote to tell us that he had shared, I think it was on the Hounds of the Internet, this kind of supposition that not seeing the hound was indeed part of what made it terrifying and left it to our imagination. Let me see here. He said, I would argue that the motivation for not showing the hound is not to minimize the horror of the crimes. Oh, excuse me, wasn't the hound. This was specifically with what happened with Sir Hugo in the tale. He said the fact that the details of the crime and intent are omitted is one of the only reasons that this book is both permissible reading in schools, rather than describing an attempt to commit sexual assault or even murder once he's discovered that the maiden fled. He says some state representative would almost certainly have a puritanical fit and attempt to ban the book by reading that passage. And then number two, it definitely dilutes the evil intent of Sir Hugo by not having it named. Yes, he's almost certainly terrorizing and kidnapping a young lady, but the fact that she's a maiden, aka a virgin, is specifically referenced out several times. Euphemisms are a frequent occurrence in the canon and other Victorian literature when untold horrors are implied. Grisly or outre crimes and indiscretions that occur or are threatened, but they're not stated outright. And I would argue that the motivation for this in The Hound is not to minimize the horror of the crimes that Hugo is committing, but in fact the contrary. Seems to be an instance of a common method for heightening the horror of a scene or a villain, which works particularly well in literature and can work in film if done well. It's left to the reader or viewer's imagination just how terrifying the evil is in Sir Hugo's heart. So there, and he goes on a little bit as well. So this notion of omitting the viewing or omitting the actual occurrence of the event, well, I think we talked about it in Jaws, and we mentioned it here in The Hound as well. I thought it was a fascinating observation. Anyway, why don't we get into the headlines? What would you like to lead us off with?
Good idea. Yes, well, there's a variety of things happening. Mark Gatiss, who was one of the leading lights behind, obviously, the BBC Sherlock series, its creation, and also acted as Mycroft, and has done an enormous number of interesting things. In fact, he was part of the, wasn't he part of the Neil Brand thing?
Yes, we've been trying to get Neil Brand to come on the show, the
orchestral version of The Hound.
Yes, speaking of The Hound,
Mark Gatiss will be is writing and starring in a new 6-part series that is being produced by sort of an offshoot, producing organization that's connected to the BBC. A series called Bookish. And Gatiss will play the role of Gabriel Book, an erudite and unconventional sleuth. I love the sound of this, who cracks mysterious cases from his antiquated bookshop, using the thousands of books that line his shelves to provide him with the knowledge that he needs. And around him are a gathering of lovable, damaged misfits. Oh boy, he would fit right in here. Who he informally protects, cajoles, and mentors. It's set in 1946. And the deal here is that I think each episode will be something like 70 minutes. And each one of his cases will occupy 2 70-minute episodes. And the producers, want to mix post-war nostalgia in 1946 Britain with, the sort of a reckless atmosphere of the times. But the interesting thing, too, is that the guest stars include people like Jolie Richardson and Daniel Mays and, many other actors, including Polly Walker, who I think starred as Lady Featherington, Portia Featherington, in Bridgerton, which everybody as a great many people have been enjoying on public television over here. So the interesting thing about Bookish is that obviously once it begins in the UK, it will eventually make its way over here. And it just sounds great. Solving cases from an antiquated bookshop. Sign me up.
That's interesting. And there's a neat connection there as well. Jolie Richardson, you mentioned. She was recently in a short series on Netflix called The Gentleman, which was written by Guy Ritchie, who, of course, Sherlockians know from the Robert Downey Jr. films. And just as an aside, I don't know if you've happened to see The Gentleman yet, but boy, is it fun. It takes place in an English country house. There's an earl who has passed, and a duke who has passed, and he amends his will so that his estate does not go to his firstborn, as the laws of progeniture would have, but it goes to his second son, who happens to be more responsible. And, oh boy, all sorts of hijinks, a little bit of hilarity. It's kind of a dark comedy happen after that, so highly recommend that.
And where is that?
That's on Netflix.
Netflix. Oh,
yeah,
gotta look
The Gentleman.
That. Super.
Yeah. But in other entertainment news, it looks like Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice are teaming up again. They, of course, have done a number of wildly successful musicals together, including Jesus Christ Superstar and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. They are reuniting on a musical called Sherlock Holmes and the 12 Days of Christmas. And it looks like it's a comedy rather than a full musical, 4 or 5 songs in all, he said, but they hope to have it on this Christmas. Written by comedians, writers and actors Humphrey Kerr and David Reed, who were both part of the Penny Dreadfuls, a sketch comedy troupe. And it'll be produced by Tim Rice's son. And that's all we have at this point. No details about the specific timing or location or whatnot, but I would imagine many folks will be looking forward to that come Christmas time.
I wonder what Sherlock Holmes will have to do with... There's got to be a goose in there somewhere. 12 Days of Christmas.
Yeah, how many geese a-laying is it?
Yeah, there you are. How many carbuncles a-laying?
Yeah. There's maids a-missing, drummers drumming.
Yeah. Well, in other news, too, friends, I think we've mentioned this before, but if you have a spare $1 million lying around, you could be thinking to yourself, I want to invest this in something that's going to increase in value rather than decrease in value. And that means you could be putting in a bid at Sotheby's for the Sign of 4 manuscript.
Oh, I thought you were going to say South African securities. I've locked up my checkbook.
As worthless as a North American security. No, this is much more valuable, much more reliable. The manuscript of Sign of 4, which will be sold in New York by Sotheby's, I think, in June. And we've been a couple of us have been musing around opportunities to see if, we could actually go in and see it. But I don't think we have the particular collective wherewithal. We could form a syndicate of IHO's listeners. If we had 1.2 million listeners and everybody put in $1, we could collectively own the Sign of Four manuscript.
Yes, this is at the ultimate level of our Patreon support.
And then we could just send it, from one of us
to
the other.
Yeah, I like
Over
that.
Over 1.2 million days. We could, everyone can have a look at it probably for about 5 seconds. As the armored car pulls up to your house.
And just kind of, and then speeds away like the ice cream truck with the kids chasing after it, right?
That's right. You run out, look through the window at it, and then wave goodbye.
I like that.
As it goes on to the house of another lucky fellow owner.
Yeah, we should park it next to an ice cream truck or a food truck.
Yeah.
And people can get stains on it. I wasn't aware that the Sign of Four manuscript actually still existed. I thought because it was so early that it would have been one of those that was lost to the ages. But evidently this was in the hands of a private collector in the Chicago area. And I don't know that there's been any success in terms of getting a digital scan of it or including it in potential future BSI manuscript series. But boy...
Yeah, that would be something. But no, there hasn't been any success in getting a scan of it. But we'll be following all this with great interest.
Yes. Now, when is that auction?
It is in 2024.
Well, that's good.
I think it's in June.
June, okay.
But I don't, off the top of my head, remember. It's a
June 26th, 10 a.m.
Yes, of course. I knew that. June 26th.
Yeah, they buried that at the bottom of the story. So, yeah, we'll have a link to all of these news items in the show notes, just so you know. Also, you might want to check out the Baker Street Almanac. The 2023 BSA is now available online for free as a PDF file. It's about 364 pages long. And the appearance of last year's almanac would indicate that the 2024 almanac is just about ready to go. So you can check that out at the Green Bag website. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes. And if you'd like to sign up for the 2024 almanac, that's available there as well.
And then we have a chat function coming to Patreon, and you might want to talk a little bit more about that than I would.
Yeah, so one of the benefits of being a Patreon supporter, not just here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, but of course on our sister show Trifles, is that you get exclusive content, you get ad-free shows, but you also have the ability to interact with us and other members. And until recently, that chat function was only available on the mobile app, which as a community moderator, I'm speaking from personal experience here, that's really difficult to manage everything on a phone. So now what Patreon has done is they've rolled out this chat function to the web. And I think that makes it easier for you as a Patreon supporter, as a Patreon community member as well. So we are going to be instituting some chats. There will be chats that are open to everyone. There will be chats that are open only to our paying subscribers. And you can be a free follower of ours on Patreon. That works too. But we'll be engaging the community there and kind of building more of the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere and Trifles communities there on Patreon. So we'd encourage you to jump in. If you have any questions, if you have any feedback, comments, or maybe some suggested discussion topics or interview subjects, we'd love to hear from you in the chat there. It's at patreon.com/ihearofsherlock. If you haven't been to the MX Publishing site in a while, well, you need to get over there and check out the new material. They're always cranking out new books, and May, April, and into June have lots to choose from. For example, This month we have Sherlock Holmes Eliminate the Impossible, in which Paula Hammond collects 6 pseudo-canonical tales, where we find Holmes and Watson encountering mummies, angels, phantoms, invisible assassins, and, well, maybe it's not exactly what it might appear. And then, in May, Mrs. Hudson for the Defense finds Sherlock Holmes coming back to London from the Sussex Downs to help out Inspector Lestrade and his ally, former landlady Mrs. Hudson. Dr. Watson, it seems, has been accused of murder. Throw in Thomas Wiggins, a junior printer who used to be the head of the Baker Street Irregulars, and you've got an interesting and rollicking story. And finally, on May 22nd, to celebrate the birthday of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, it's the 2nd edition of The Monographs, Becoming Sherlock Holmes. The first set was comprehensive, but an introduction to the world of thinking like Sherlock Holmes. From looking at the practices of neuroscience, we can develop our own emotional control and sharpness of our minds, just like Sherlock Holmes. Ben Cardall takes us through all of that in this 2nd edition. So browse around at mxpublishing.com, find what suits your reading needs, and envelop yourself in Sherlock Holmes stories today. Elizabeth Crowens has worn many hats in the entertainment industry in New York and Los Angeles for over 25 years. Her writing credits include short stories and articles in Black Belt, Blackgate, and Sherlock Holmes mystery magazines. She has stories in Hell's Heart and the Bram Stoker Award-nominated A New York State of Fright. She has 3 alternate history, science fiction, fantasy novels, which she publishes under the name of Atomic Alchemist Productions. You may recall those in the form of Silent Meridian, Time-Traveling Professor, A Pocket Full of Lodestones, and A War of Too Many Worlds. Recipient of the MWA New York Leo Bernstein Scholarship, New York Foundation of the Arts, grant to produce a self-published photo-illustrated anthology, a Glimmer Train Honorable Mention, an Eric Hoffer First Prize, 2 Grand Prize, and 4 First Prize Chanticleer Review Awards. Elizabeth is represented by Elizabeth K. Cracked at Kimberly Cameron & Associates and is currently writing the sequel to this Hollywood mystery genre that we're talking about with her today. The book in question is Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles, which takes us back in time to a golden age of Hollywood. Elizabeth Crowens, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Well, let's begin at the beginning, shall we? Where did you first run into Sherlock Holmes?
You know, I came in late to the game. I've listened to a lot of your episodes, and of course, I've attended a lot of Scion meetings and met a lot of fellow Sherlockians. And so many people I run into, you know, they read the canon like at the age of 8. And that was not me. My parents never kept books in the house. Why? I don't know. I had free range at the library, both the school library and the public library. But my first introduction to Sherlock Holmes was a 3-network analog television. And, you got ABC, NBC, and CBS. And eventually we got an antenna so we could get PBS. But basically it was like that Saturday afternoon matinee. And guess who was on? It was Basil Rathbone. In fact, I was, I guess so tunnel visioned with my upbringing that I thought he was the only person who played Sherlock Holmes for the longest time.
And where was this? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the same town as Dan Andriaco, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Oh. And have you been to you mentioned Scions. Have you been to the Scion meetings that go on in Cincinnati and Dayton and places like that?
No, I have not. I actually met Dan the first time for the first time, the last time I actually went to Cincinnati. I only have one living relative there. So, and it happened to be that I was attending a convention in Columbus. So I rented a car and went to see my father's sister. But apparently an old friend from high school looked me up in alumni book and said, I want you to meet somebody who's really into Sherlock Holmes. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, he's a published author. He's published a lot of stuff, and he hooked me up with Dan.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just curious, what kind of convention were you at? What were you doing professionally?
Well, I'm a writer, and I was actually attending the World Fantasy Convention, which is at a different location every year, but it happened to be in Columbus that year.
Ah, fabulous.
Superb. So you've written some books before, and I don't know if our Sherlockian audience has come across them. I think we've reviewed them on the site.
You have, yes.
The Silent Meridian. You've got it's a time traveler professor series. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. I fell into that kind of strangely, put it that way. And I had a Scottish protagonist that was from Edinburgh, and he needed kind of a famous author as a mentor. And all of a sudden, of course, I'm doing the Google search, and who are and then there's quite a few famous authors from Edinburgh. And I knew that my guy was born during the Victorian era. And all of a sudden I said, oh, Arthur Conan Doyle, how cool is this? And when I started reading some biographies on him, I had absolutely no idea about his interest in the paranormal and spiritualism, because my protagonist had interest in that area. So I said, I like this. And I wanted kind of a skeptical kind of antagonist, you might say, to Conan Doyle, who didn't believe in any of this stuff. So he was completely scientific and actually thought a little more along the line of Sherlock Holmes. And I came up with H.G. Wells, who did, obviously write a lot of science fiction. And that, believe it or not, was what I call a pantsed project. And for people who are not writers, people ask, are you a plotter or a pantser? And a pantser is somebody who kind of flies by the seat of their pants. They don't really have a strong outline, and they're just kind of going intuitively with the flow. And it takes a lot longer to write a novel that way, but that's how I wrote the first novel. I became a plotter very quickly afterwards. But that's kind of how I fell into that particular series. And what I do, and it's technically called alternate history. And this particular alternate history falls into the subgenre of science fiction fantasy because it does have a time machine. And of course, we all know that H.G. Wells is very famous for his book, The Time Machine. But I decided that I was going to kind of play with real life events. And so I read like tons of biographies on these people and where they could have potentially been in the same place at the same time. And of course, a lot of very heavy duty world events, happened. The first book, Silent Meridian, starts out in 1895. And at that point, Conan Doyle was actually trying to run for political office in Edinburgh. He did not win. Obviously, if he did, we would have known about it. But he, obviously was living, southeast of London at the time. But I needed him to be up by Edinburgh, and it happened to be that my protagonist attended Edinburgh University. So I kind of had their first meeting over there. And my protagonist basically had some strange paranormal things happen to him, and he figured, if anybody can answer my questions, maybe the guy who wrote Sherlock Holmes could. So that's kind of how the springboard where I started with the series.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It was. I learned so much. And in fact, I was reading everything I could get my hands on by Conan Doyle, including his non-Sherlock Holmes stuff.
And of all that material, what stood out to you?
Believe it or not, and I have complimented him, is the two books that Daniel Stashauer has written. The one with the Life of Letters, and then he also wrote one with two other people. And I just found that those particular books really just gave me some insight about this guy. And the more I read, the more I was just fascinated with Conan Doyle. And of course, obviously, at that point, I said, I really have to. I had not at that point read all the canon. So I said, guess it's time.
And after having grown up on Basil Rathbone,
yes,
and steeped yourself in Conan Doyle and Edinburgh and the rest, tell us about your impression of the complete canon, because I would imagine you had read some of the short stories along the way, but when you finally
mostly was movies, and again, Basil Rathbone. In fact, I ended up when I was doing all this research, I was actually taking a class over at FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, and I decided to take a public speaking class. And the reason why is because here, I was trying to get books published. I figured, hey, you know what? I'm going to be called to speak in public. And, I never really had to do it. I mean, my day job for many, many years was a photographer. So we're kind of the person who kind of hides behind a lens and is very quiet and sneaks around the background. And all of a sudden, oh my God, I've got to stand up at a podium and talk in front of maybe a few hundred people. So I took the course, and as my final project, we had to do a PowerPoint presentation, and I picked Conan Doyle. And I actually dressed up in Victorian clothing. I just went all out for this class. And in researching it, I discovered that apparently Sherlock Holmes had won the Guinness Book of World Records for more actors portraying him in film, theater, and television. And I think I think they said it was like 128 or could have been more. But the only character that has surpassed Sherlock Holmes was a non-human character, which was Dracula, apparently. So I know, right? But I was curious because I said, and of course, I think the Robert Downey Jr. Movie had just been, the first one, I think, had just been released around that time. And I just said, gee, there was all these other people that played Sherlock Holmes. I've been like, where have I been hiding, under a rock? So I just, as I said, I kind of came to it late in the game, but as soon as I did, I dove in head first.
It's interesting, with your photography background, because in looking at your bio too, I know that one of your books is New York, Give Me Your Best or Your Worst.
Yes.
which you've got you have photography and you edited that book. And I'm just curious about, this. You've got such a strong visual sense. What did you think about Conan Doyle, and how did that inform your writing and in getting from the photographic image, what's communicated, that sense of mystery or whatever, of emotion that's in the photographic image, and how did that help you get it on the page?
Well, my major in college was photography, and my minor was film studies. And by the time I hit my senior year, and I went to school in New York, college in New York, I really wanted to switch my major to film. But unfortunately, my college, I went to Pratt, my instructors were from the Andy Warhol kind of artsy school. They were completely the opposite of what you would be studying probably at USC or UCLA in California, where you would learn more commercial filmmaking. And which is good and which is bad. Bad in the fact that I was really unrealistically, I was definitely unprepared, put it that way, for the real world and how to work in the movie industry when I graduated. But what I wanted to do was to switch my major and go to NYU, or possibly go to NYU for a master's degree. And I flat ran out of money. But I had this heavy-duty, film background. And the one thing that I guess it just kind of dawned on me fairly early, even working on 16-millimeter student film productions, is how expensive filmmaking was. It was nothing like we didn't have iPhones back then. You had to shoot on film, and you had to buy the film stock, and you had to get it processed at a film lab. And then you had to sit behind an editing machine and edit it. And you also had to understand something about sound editing, which I was terrible at because I was so visual. But I realized that filmmaking is really, at least back then, it still is to a certain extent, a very collaborative effort and a very expensive effort. And I got involved in screenwriting because I was ready to say, well, all it takes is a fresh typewriter ribbon. And of course, this is way before we had computers, and typewriter paper. And I could knock off an interesting screenplay, and it's not going to cost me a lot of money as opposed to putting together a film. So that's when I started getting into writing. Was because my visual ideas and everything, it was cheaper to put it to paper and easier. I could actually see a start to finish project as opposed to picking up a motion picture, camera and buying film and trying to do it myself.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so it seems like, your experience in film, your experience in scripts, encountering Basil Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes, reading the canon, seems like all of this has come together now in Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles, which is, I think, just been published last month, right? March?
Yes, March 5th. Yes. It's only been all of this is so iconic, and speaking of film icons, Nick and Nora Charles and Asta and William Powell. So what was the spark that got you into all of that? Well, there were a lot of sparks. And I actually had my first live book launch event at the Mysterious Bookshop last night. And I basically answered that question last night when it came up. Was my original concept, Babs Norman, who is my protagonist, is actually based on one of my best friends. And she was an actress in the 40s. Unfortunately, she is no longer with us. But she was a frustrated actress and model and decided to get out of the profession. But she had some very strange stories. And I actually got a lawyer before she passed away. She wanted me to do her memoirs for her. And we, wrote up all the legal contracts, so, everything was above board. And I felt really terrible because this was, a woman who was getting on in years. And I'm thinking, I don't know how to market her because I have a friend or an acquaintance. I won't say we're great friends, but I have an acquaintance who climbed Mount Everest. And he got an agent, and for a year and a half they shopped it, and they couldn't find a traditional publisher, and he ended up having to self-publish his memoirs. So memoirs are like the hardest things to get published. And I'm thinking, oh, what am I going to do? She's not a famous actress. She's never really done anything famous or notorious, or she's not like a big political figure. Those are the people who get the publishing deals for memoirs. So all of a sudden, one day, the light bulb went off. And I said, you know what? I think I figured out how to market you. I said, we're going to fictionalize you. And you will be an actress in the 40s. And you will leave the profession. And you're going to become a PI. And she asked me, well, where did you come up with that one? And I said, well, every time I come and visit you, you're reading a mystery novel and from the library, or if you're watching television, you're either watching Murder, She Wrote, TCM, NCIS, Law and Order, or one of the animal shows, Nat Geo Wild or Animal Planet. So I said, we're going to have you an animal-loving PI and in the 40s. And I said, how does that sound? I said, I think we've got something that'll work. And she said, I love it. So we drew up the paperwork, and of course I was thinking she's going to have celebrity clients. So who, 1940, who should I pick? And I'm thinking, well, I've done all this research on Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes for my other series. Why not go with Basil Rathbone, right? If it takes place in Hollywood, people knew him as Sherlock Holmes. And he had just completed the 2 pictures for Fox Studios, and his third picture he was going to jump to Universal with. But all of a sudden, when I started reading my first biography of his, he was a major animal lover. And he just went on and on and on. And he had, like, at any given time, at least 5 dogs, several cats, canaries. And I kept on reading in several books of his. He got incredibly distraught. One of his best friends got hit in a car accident. And it was while walking his dogs. And unfortunately, his friend passed away. The dogs got hurt, but they survived. And I said, you know what? One of those dogs that reminds him of his friend that's really near and dear to his heart, somebody's going to take that dog. And he's just going to go get completely distraught over it. And then I'm thinking to myself, I could just imagine somebody like Basil Rathbone going to the city pound and going into the police department, asking them if they'll help find his dog. And they'll laugh at him. They'll figure, yeah, right, Sherlock Holmes has lost his dog. Go find him yourself. You're the world's greatest consulting detective. So that was kind of the impetus as to how he met my 2 fictional PIs, is they meet in a vet's office. The poor guy is despondent. He's putting up flyers for lost dogs. And I had to ramp it up a notch, though, because I'm saying to myself, well, yeah, Basil's really famous, and he's done a lot of films before he did the Sherlock Holmes films, but his dog isn't famous. We need a famous movie dog that's also missing. And so what I did is I had Basil, he's got a Variety under his arm with a full-page ad for MGM, and Asta's missing. It's like, oh no, they can't go into the next installment of the Thin Man movie without their movie dog. And that's kind of where I went from there.
What a lot of fun. I mean, You've already kind of given us your bona fides as a writer of historical fiction, and you've moved from the late 1800s, early 1900s up to the 1940s. Seems like quite frankly, a wonderful era to be steeped in, the late 30s, early 40s. It was just I think, a time where Hollywood made life seem so glamorous, perhaps simple, and putting an investigator into that mix. Well, it just followed naturally with the amazing number of Hollywood films that were about detectives at the time.
Absolutely. It was so much fun, and what was such a bizarre experience about it is I was learning things as I was writing it. And all of a sudden, I'd look up something, and I know before the Nick and Nora Charles films, William Powell did some of the Philo Vance films. And guess what? I found out that Basil Rathbone also did a Philo Vance film. So I actually had the two of them debating at one point, who was the better actor? Or you took the job away from me.
One of William Powell's early roles was in John Barrymore's Sherlock Holmes movie.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool. I probably read that somewhere, but I was so overwhelmed with research at the time. That is cool. Yeah. Well, who did he play? Do you know?
Well, he played I don't remember the name of the character, but he played somebody who had come under the thumb of Moriarty, as I remember. So he played sort of a supporting character.
Oh, okay.
And I think it may have been his first role. He was very young.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know. So many actors have wound up in films or theater. I mean, even Charlie Chaplin was like a child, and he was doing the stage in London. Yeah,
he played Billy the Page Boy in William Gillette's play.
Yeah, yeah.
So the way that at least the subtitle of the book conveys it to us, that this is a Babs Norman Hollywood mystery, that would seem to indicate that Babs may be back in a follow-up novel.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one thing that should be prefaced is that it is not a Sherlock Holmes pastiche. However, I won't spoil the way they solve the case, but they actually find Babs finds a clue in the canon that helps her solve the case of these missing dogs.
Always welcome to find inspiration from the pages. And we know there were a number of dogs mentioned in the canon. So, of course, the most famous one shares its title with your book, The Hound of the Baskervilles. So maybe that's a little bit of a clue for readers who may be curious about this. So what do you, and I'm not pressing you for any spoilers, but where are we going to find Babs next?
Oh, Babs next. Well, at the end, the good news is no dogs die. Okay, that's always a rule when you're writing about animals. Well, there are exceptions, as we know. Fatal Attraction. Okay, they do kill the bunny rabbit, but but no dogs die, and everybody whose dog was kidnapped gets rescued, and they throw a big party because the Thin Man films were produced by MGM, so MGM is financing a lot of the fees to try to find the dogs. And they have a big, big party big publicity affair on the studio lot, and a lot of the people whose dogs were found show up, and of course they want photos for the press. And it happens to be that one of the dogs that was missing was Humphrey Bogart's, and he has he has a Newfoundland named Cappy, and apparently that was one of the dogs that had disappeared but was found. And apparently Humphrey is playing with some of the dogs on the studio lot, and Guy Brandt, who is Babs's, kind of her Watson, to her being a Sherlock, he has a conversation with Humphrey Bogart, and Humphrey at this point in 1940s pretty much played the bad guy. He was kind of in a lot of B movies too, but they started talking about, I've got the script, I'm really excited about it, my next project, I'm actually going to play the lead, and I'm a good guy, and he has the conversation with Guy Brandt, and Guy gives him his business card. He said, well, you never know. We're not really, quote unquote, pet detectives. We work with, cheating spouses, people who owe money, and they, skip tracing. But he said, you never know. I mean, if you're an up-and-coming actor, somebody might try to blackmail you. If you think you ever need a PI, here's my card. And it happens to be that in 1941, which is just around the corner, and when the next book starts, it's called Bye Bye Blackbird. And it happens to be featuring Humphrey Bogart and a black bird. So,
which bird could that be?
Yes, exactly. So that's kind of a hint as to where the next book is going. The cast of the Maltese Falcon will be threatened, and it's a lot darker, actually. The first book, The Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles, is more like a 1940s Turner Classic movie screwball comedy. There are laugh out loud moments, and there will be some funny things going on. I mean, they'll still, Babs and Guy will still have kind of their Nick and Nora Charles, kind of air about them. But it's definitely going to be, the stakes are going to be a lot higher in book 2.
Well, that sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. But what I was saying before about sometimes you learn things as you go along.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, and I actually won a trivia contest on this, and I was really shocked because I was in a room full of people at a mystery convention, and apparently I don't think anybody had read The Thin Man. They had seen the movies, but they had not read Hammett's book. And in Hammett's book, Asta was a schnauzer. And he was not a wire-haired fox terrier. And it happened to be that they couldn't find, the Hollywood dog trainers couldn't find a schnauzer that was well-trained enough to be able to play Asta. So they ended up switching dogs. But at the very beginning of Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles, Babs and Guy end up, they take on Basil's case to help find his dog on a contingency that he kind of does a little sleuthing of his own, kind of pulls the Sherlock Holmes persona, and also ropes in William Powell and Myrna Loy, as the Nick and Nora Charles thing to try to solve this case. And the three, Babs, Guy, and Basil Rathbone, decide to interrogate Dashiell Hammett. And they don't want to leave any stones unturned. I mean, everybody's, possibly guilty until proven innocent. So they meet him at his penthouse suite at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. And at one point, Hammett says something, that's when he said, did you know that in the book he's a Schnauzer. And I said, for all we know, maybe somebody took him because they're upset they didn't use a Schnauzer. I mean, who knows? I mean, people do commit strange crimes for the weirdest of reasons, right? And he made a comment which was hilarious because, and I just came up with this on the top of my head, but he said, you know what, because he only wrote the screenplay for the first one and he was a consultant for the future Thin Man series. He said, for all I know, they're going to hire some screenwriter and they're going to get rid of the dog altogether. And for all we know, they could recast it with a snake, with an orangutan, or a foul-mouthed, wisecracking mynah bird. Well, the funny thing about the foul-mouthed, wisecracking mynah bird was that I completely forgot I wrote that line in the first book when I started writing the second book. And at one point, my protagonists are interviewing Jack Warner, who was the production executive of the 5 Warner Brothers. And apparently, he makes a comment that somebody gave him a foul-mouthed, wisecracking mynah bird, and he outdid the bird. The bird got upset because he would curse and swear all the time in his office. And I ended up giving Babs and Guy a foul-mouthed, wisecracking mynah bird. So this mynah bird winds up in book 2, and they can't seem to get rid of this thing. They want to pawn it off on everybody. So funny things happen when you start writing.
Well, sounds like a great deal of fun, and keeping us in that same era of Hollywood, running into these iconic figures that we all know from films and shows that we love. What a treat. What a treat. And how wonderful that we get a taste of Basil Rathbone off screen in this first edition of the Babs Norman book. The book is Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles by Elizabeth Crowens. You can find it wherever books are sold. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you.
Well, it was a fun talking to Elizabeth. I just have sort of 3 quick takeaways. One is that during the interview, we mentioned William Powell, and I just wanted to explain to our listeners. It was 1922 in that Barrymore picture that William Powell played Foreman Wells, and then 8 years later, he was really a star. That's when he starred as Philo Vance, before, of course, the Thin Man series. But this conversation with Elizabeth, what it means to me is that these classic films were so successful at creating worlds that we still want to go back to here in the third decade of the 21st century. And so you've got Rathbone and Bogart and the whole feeling of putting these great classics together. And it's incredible how durable they are.
Yeah, they really are. I mean, in some ways, that era of Hollywood is almost like 1895 was to the early Baker Street Irregulars. There was a sense of nostalgia for this time that was half remembered, half forgot, as Edgar Smith called it. I think we still, even though we're almost 100 years now, 80 years now past the Rathbone era, there's still a whole bunch of generations that are connected to that, and it is so accessible because they are all now streaming, or we've seen them on DVDs or on Saturday matinees or what have you, that it just seems so much more accessible than even 40 years before that. So wonderful time to revisit once again. All right, it's everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz program. That's right, it's time for Canonical Couplet, where we give you 2 lines of poetry, and you have to identify which Sherlock Holmes story it comes from. And if you're successful, you'll potentially win a prize. So let's open up the archives and hear what last episode's clue was. A love triangle that ended in tense altercation. One suffered death and another mutilation. Bert, do you know which Sherlock Holmes story we are talking about here?
Oh, of course. That's the case that begins when Mycroft was served an overcooked pudding. It's the case Watson called the creepy flan.
Hey, wow.
The creeping flan?
No. Another valiant attempt. I'm going to have to give you a big no on this one, though. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know. But the good news is our friend Eric Deckers came to the rescue once again and had this to say. He said, given my near miss with the bear joke last time, I'd better cub my enthusiasm. I'm not one to panda to anyone. And I don't want Scott to throw an Ursa Major fit.
Maybe an Ursa Minor.
Well done, yeah. Well done on the puns there, Eric. Eric continues. So this week's canonical couplet sounded like the story about the deformed former soldier who used to perform a novelty act with a piece of pork flesh and a stoat.
Oh, that was I remember that act.
Yeah.
It was on Ed Sullivan. Yeah.
Well, then you should have come up with what Watson called the adventure of the pre-cooked ham. I'm sorry, Eric writes. I'm thinking of my recent Easter dinner. It's more likely to be the adventure of the crooked man. All right. There we go. So not the crooked flan, not the pre-cooked ham. Creeping flan. Not the pre-cooked ham. The crooked man. Yes. And you know what? Eric got it wrong again.
Oh, no.
This is
one.
It
doesn't matter. It was funny.
It was very funny. But this is one that vexed a number of people. I would say it was about an even split that we had from our entries this week. About half of our entries came in as the creeping man, and the other half came in correctly as the veiled lodger. Oh, the veiled lodger. Say a love triangle. There were love triangles in both. That ended in tense altercation. Yes, that happened in both. One suffered death, and another mutilation. Right? Well, the ears being cut off was certainly mutilation, but recall in the cardboard box, they both died. So in this case, we're looking for the veiled lodger. The veiled lodger, where Leonardo, the strong man, he fled the scene, and it was, of course, Ronder who suffered death, and Mrs. Ronder who suffered mutilation in that case. Yeah. So we're going to go to an admittedly smaller prize wheel and give it a spin. I was hoping since it was smaller it would spin more quickly, but it doesn't seem to be the case. But it does land on number 11, and that looks like it is Chris Chan. Chris, congratulations. And I have in my record that you won, must have been a couple of years ago, and I don't know that we ever got you your prize. So we are going to make sure that we get you something special from the iHose vaults this time around, and, I'm sure you'll be hearing from us. And now we have the latest canonical couplet. Get ready. Here's the clue. Here, Greek meets Greek, one might append, and how? And here, Big Brother Mycroft takes his bow. If you know the answer to this canonical couplet, put it in an email. Address the comment at ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If you are among all of the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win. Good luck. And we have a copy of Elizabeth Crowens' Hounds of the Hollywood Baskervilles for our winner this time around.
And also a basket of kittens.
Yeah, and if you don't answer this quiz, we will throw this basket of kittens into the river.
Oh.
Now, what was that old National Lampoon?
Buy this magazine or we'll shoot this dog.
That's the one.
Yeah. On the cover.
And I think they turned it into an album, too. Buy this album or we'll shoot this dog.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I'm happy to say no animals were harmed in the making of this episode.
Do we have a representative from the Humane Society monitoring our podcast?
Gosh, I hope not.
Where is he or she?
No, because humans are considered part of the animal kingdom. And gosh knows how many people we harm who listen to this show just by virtue of our banter.
Banter.
Yeah. No animals or humans were harmed in the making of this episode. Can't really speak to whether it's in the listening of this episode, but that's another thing entirely. Well, this is the completely harmless Scott Monty.
And the slightly wounded Burt Wolder.
And until we see you around here next time, it's our pleasure to say, the game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.